Look at the geometric drawing that accompanies this article. Do you see a white path on top of brown walls or a white path going around the brown walls? Be forewarned, what you first see is likely what you will keep seeing. Our brains like patterns. They lock onto them like radar and won't easily let them go. M.C. Escher was a master at drawing pictures filled with optical illusions. A Dutch graphic artist who died in 1972, he left a huge portfolio of images that will leave you shaking your head and laughing in disbelief. Take his 1961 drawing Waterfall, for example. Google Escher Waterfall if you'd like to see it. At first glance, you see a waterfall cascading over a mill wheel, a non-surprising image from the days of water-powered mills. But if you follow the path of the water, after it falls over the mill wheel, it flows uphill through a channel and falls over the mill wheel again. It's a perpetual motion mill wheel. Totally impossible, and yet it looks completely normal at first glance. What's happening there? Well, the pattern or plan thing again. We expect to see a pattern like water flowing downhill and powering a mill wheel. Our brains are used to that image, but suddenly we realize the image is impossible. We are definitely not used to the idea of water flowing uphill. Yet the image is clearly drawn, so clearly drawn, that it looks totally believable. Think about how much of our lives is based on predictable patterns. Gravity controls lots of things in our lives. Like water flowing downhill, leaves falling, and what goes up must come down. So our brain is looking for that pattern. Even when that pattern is violated in a drawing, we still think it's there. Patterns are predictable. Think how much easier our lives are because of them. We go to bed and get up around the same time each day. Our family schedules are based on daily patterns of behavior. In fact, the entire universe operates in a predictable manner because God designed it that way. Think how confusing life would be if every day lasted a different number of hours. Thankfully, the patterns got built into the universe. Gravity, oxygen, planetary orbits don't change. But other patterns in our lives do, and that's when we find troubling. When things don't go the way we expect in life, when water starts flowing uphill instead of downhill, we are suddenly confused. We don't get the important phone call we're expecting. Our spouse acts in an unpredictable, hurtful manner. Traffic on the freeway makes us late for an important meeting. We experience ill health that interferes with our plans. Depending on the details, we may adjust quickly and easily when we discover an altered pattern in life. But sometimes we don't. And if we are Christians, our first thought turns to God. Why has God changed the pattern? But we have to remember God is sovereign as creator, and he is free to intervene in the normal patterns of our life at any time to accomplish his good purposes. That's what a miracle is. God supernaturally overcoming or changing a natural expected outcome in life. So patterns are good and helpful. But we must remember that God can step into the patterns of life at any time. It's in those times that we are called to trust him instead of being upset that he has allowed a change in our lives. One of the best biblical examples of God interrupting someone's pattern of life is Gideon during the Old Testament period of the Judges, Judges 6:1 through 9:6. Gideon's life was very predictable as a farmer. He was turned into the agricultural cycles of life. Yes, farmers live with variables like weather, but those are built into the pattern of his vocation. Gideon and his father lived simple lives as Israelites, minding their own business, until, that is, the pattern of God's blessing on Israel seemed to disappear. Life under the Old Covenant, the Mosaic Law, was predictable. If Israel obeyed God's covenant, the land and people would be blessed. If they disobeyed the covenant, judgments would arise. When the massive Midianite army came against Israel, threatening Gideon's livelihood, he wondered, why is God allowing this? See Judges 6:13. But that was just the beginning. God's angel told Gideon that he was to be the chosen instrument to deliver Israel from the marauding Midianites and to a place of repentance before God. See Judges 6:14. What? A simple farmer who knew nothing of warfare was to be God's deliverer of Israel? There was no plan for this, no pattern in Israel's history. This was completely unpredictable, an obvious intrusion by God into the natural order of things. But Gideon wasn't buying it. His faith had no room for such an unpredictable event. So he asked the angel of the Lord for confirmation. It came in two different ways. Fire consumed a sacrifice that Gideon prepared, and he was protected from angry crowds when he tore down an altar to the idol Baal. See Judges 6:19 through 32. So Gideon stepped out in faith and called together an army of Israelites. But his faith wavered, and he asked for two more signs that God would be with him. The test of the fleece. See Judges 6:36 to 40. And God complied with the request, but the pattern kept breaking down. Instead of going to war with the 32,000 Israelites who gathered themselves to Gideon, God told him to keep only 300. See Judges 7:3-8. And instead of arming his men with swords, spears, and armor, God told Gideon to give them trumpets, empty pitchers, and torches. They surrounded the huge Midianite camp at night and, well, on Gideon's signal, crashed the pitchers, blew the trumpets, and waved their torches. The Midianites thought they were surrounded by an even bigger army than themselves and fled in confusion and disorder. Israel was saved, but not in the way that Gideon would have planned it, and not the way you or I would have either. So the question is, what do we do when God's plan disrupts the pattern of our life? What happens when we look at our circumstances and think, this can't be happening? Water's not supposed to be from flowing uphill. I'm looking at my life and I know it's not supposed to look like this. What you're experiencing is God stepping into the predictability of your life to do something you didn't expect. Isn't that what happened to Gideon? He was a farmer, but he knew how battles were typically fought. A general like Joshua would lead an army equipped with weapons to defeat the enemy. But God's plan was different for Gideon, and it will often be different for us. A few years back, a particular kind of puzzle was popular. At first glance, it appeared to be a large poster filled with colored dots. The instructions told the viewer to stare through the poster, as if fixing one's eyes on something in the distance. It was hard to do. The tendency was to keep refocusing on the dots themselves. But if one kept looking through the dots, suddenly images began to appear in the collection of dots. It was really quite amazing. It had to do with the brain's ability to focus on one thing while looking at another. Did you get that? There is a difference between looking and focusing. Our job is to focus on God instead of looking and agonizing over the dots in front of us. God has a plan. God has authored the big picture. What we see as puzzling, God sees as His perfect plan for our lives. So, be willing to be puzzled. Our faith is built when questions arise and we are forced to depend on God. Let God be God. We will never know everything He knows, and we need to be okay with that. Take time. Puzzles are rarely solved quickly. The longer we contemplate the puzzle, the more likely we are to understand it. Keep your focus. As the saying goes, we often can't see the forest for the trees. Step back and focus on the big picture. And pray for the plan to emerge out of the puzzle. God doesn't play games with us, but He does reward those who diligently seek Him by faith. And remember, without faith, it is impossible to please Him, as we read in Hebrews 11:6.